Dobrý večer.
Good evening. Dobrý večer. This discussion will be held in Slovak and French. Mr. Gilles Lipovecky and Václav Bělohradský are our tonight's guests. They will speak in their mother languages in order to be the most precise, because this is quite a complicated topic. You will receive information concerning the channels on which you will be able to listen to your respective languages. I believe that it's channels number 2 and 6, but I am not quite sure. I believe these gentlemen do not need any special introduction, but after the end of this panel, there will be an autograph signing possibility where you can also buy the works by Mr. Lipovecky as well as those by Mr. Bělohradský. I believe that you have all your headsets, so we can jump right into our topic, which is the shrinking of the public space, the public as such, whether the public space has disappeared or a new one is in the making. This is an important topic today when we remember the 25th anniversary of the creation of the Public Against Violence. So we are going to speak about public, if there is any such thing as public today. Mr. Lipovecky, good evening. My first question is addressed to you. Today, we are witnessing the emptying of public spaces, the shrinking of public spaces. Good evening. I'm very happy to be with you in this very lovely city that I had not known before. I am very happy that I had a chance to come here and also to have the opportunity to discuss serious issues, but sometimes even frivolous issues, because the interconnection between public and private space creates a specific configuration. What is it specific about? What is specific about it? I'll answer this question, which is often presented in the media. We often speak about private life. We can see these issues being discussed on the internet, and people even publish their private information, private pictures on the internet. So this is a private space which differs from the concept of the public space of the past. The public space where we encounter one another suffers from a certain deflation, from lack of motivation. And I have to say at this point that there is a shrinking of private life, or some kind of retreat of private life. First of all, private life as such has disappeared today because we have people on the internet who are discussing everything, showing everything. I do not consider this to be as a complete loss of private life, but it is a new definition of boundaries of what's private life. We have to all understand that when you go to your Facebook page, you have a key, you have a password by means of which you can reconstitute your private space. And through this private space, you communicate about everything you are doing, you want to do. On the other hand, as you know, there are many crises. There are people who want to show their private lives towards the outside. Like, for example, homosexuality is a problem that even led to suicides, because these are things that that used to be considered as secrecy, as something that's private, but this is not private anymore. So the definition of what's private has changed, and when we want to enter our private life, we need the password. Let me ask a question to Mr. Belohradek. You spoke about the loss of secret life, private life. I do not think so. I believe there is just a different definition of what's private life.
We have mentioned the issue of disappearing privacy or changing privacy, which we enter via codes in some cases, and my question is, what equivalent to this would be a change in the public space? Let's say a great slogan when analyzing the television space was a global village. Marshall McLuhan was the first one to come with this concept or term of global village, and it is not interpreted in the original meaning. The original meaning was it's an oxymoron. We know how the American presidents walk, or we've seen Reagan's intestines when he was sick, and we know how they speak, and we know what is their accent, like, you know, the people in the village. But in this case, it's a global village, and the global village lacks something, that's the proximity of a normal village. And I think that was a problem, and today we are in a different global village. I would call a global village of leaked information about everything and everyone. So it's a global village of the reverse side. For instance, in our public space, in its center, we have a mass of information called WikiLeaks, which is the leaked information, which casts a sharp light on what is democracy and decision-making in democracy and what is diplomacy, etc. We all remember this famous Fuck Europe, which is a leaked telephone call from BBC. And what this will do with the public space, because everywhere we come to leaked information about everything and everyone, and it has consequences which are a key to understand the era we live. And the first consequence is a too sober view. Maybe you remember Marx and his sentence in the Communist Manifest that the ice water of bourgeoisie cast cold water on religion, blah, blah, and made us to see the world in a sober way. And then so today, the WikiLeaks, this leaked information, this mass of uncontrolled information about everything and everyone, forces us to get a new sober view. And are we so far as to say a cynic view? I am almost inclined to say yes. Let's take this general hatred to politicians and politics. It is surely linked with the fact that we are informed about politics from this leaked information, from this tapped information, from different stolen information. And what is the consequence of this? The most important one. The most important one consequence is that we are witnesses of loss of face. Everybody tries to keep a face, something like what Velikovsky calls a utility surface, and you may lose it. And we live in society where, due to WikiLeaks, all institutions lost their face, including the states, politics, and you are unable to keep a representation of the whole. And I think this is the most important factor of public space. And these waves of angriness, angry people, this turn to political figures like Berlusconi or Marie Le Pen, is this turn because we don't know what to do with this mass of leaked information, which is taking away the legitimacy, but it comes with no offer. Mr. Lipovietsky, do you agree? Do you want to comment, or are you going to continue this idea of Mr. Bielohradsky? I will continue, elaborate on this idea. My point of view will be not the point of view of internet. It is a very important aspect, though, and I think that this changes, its metamorphosis of public space today is something which is linked to this deep change we witness today. Maybe in the past it was collective ideas which would determine the access to public life. We had revolutions, we had socialism, we had republic in France and in Spain and in southern countries. I think the countries would have the same line of thinking. I am not so familiar with other contexts. And in the last decades, we see these large collective ideologies which have changed, which have also changed the relation to public life, and in a broader concept, a political life, was this promise of a better future. There was a hope, of course, that tomorrow it will be different. We had an idea that via politics we can change the world. However, I think that almost everywhere in all countries this belief disappeared. You speak about the function of the political space, the space that was this exclusive promise of a future. Is there another public space? No, I don't think that there is something else coming to replace it. We don't have to stick to the idea that we will live in an empty space. And the political intention is something different. I don't want to speak about it because if I continue what I've said before is this idea, democracy, public space, which shrinked and which is vanishing, and we see collapsing democratic life, but I don't think that it is the reality. It is a different understanding of democracy, which is now translated into certain fights, commitments, and goals which are far better targeted and short-term, and people, citizens, through elections, voting, think that they will be able to create a new world. And I think this doesn't exist. But it doesn't mean that the people don't do anything today. What we see today is a counter-democracy. That is how we used to call it. The idea that we have a democracy of supervision, of participation, or democracy that expresses something.
But do you think it works? Do you believe in what you're saying? Yes. For example, in France, you have a project of building a dam in one of the regions, doesn't matter where. This was announced by democratic institutions using normal channels, but at the same time there are various associations that voice their disagreement with the construction of the dam, like, for example, environmentalists. So what does it mean? It doesn't mean that there is a kind of an apathy or indifference. We want public things, but our motivation is different. Maybe we are not today committed to our party. People do not trust the political parties. They do not trust the government, parliament, that is the traditional institutions for public life. This, however, does not mean that they will not purchase their clothes in Zara or will not go to a supermarket. Is there a relationship, in your opinion, between what Mr. Bielohradsky said, that is a loss of trust of people in political parties or the state, and the fact that today there are many things that seem to be published by, so to say, mistake, as a leak. I know what you want to say, but there is something that also contributes to this fact. Like, for example, there is a much deeper skepticism compared to the period of Cold War. At that time, there was ideological blindness, which means that even if people had information, they would not believe them. They said, no, we are not able to explain this on the basis of this information. People had information, but it's much more complicated. We cannot simply say we do not believe anymore. People are not bound to major ideologies as before. They receive lots of information concerning not only hard facts, but there are various conspiracy or conspirational theories and such. And it's going to be necessary to fight this phenomenon. I believe that this conspirationalism is not only related to the Internet. Let me briefly explain it. I believe that this is also a reflection of society that has not a concept of the future. And I think this is a symptomatic phenomenon. People create or take certain measures motivated by fear of the future because of the loss of prospects. And when people are afraid of, for example, unemployment or things like that, they tend to fall down upon themselves, and this may be also due to this. So, do you really believe that we are not able to replace the shrinking public space to fill it with something? The basic idea is to create a legitimate representation of the whole. A real representation only exists when it is able to generate a legitimate representation of the whole. And what is representation? We are all familiar with the saying that nobody is a hero before his butler, but we live in the world which is filled with butlers, and there is always a leak of what I say, I believe, in private. Like, for example, our minister at the time when he was to fly to Mandela's funeral said that I really don't feel like flying so far, but this leaked, and the Czech media elaborated on this very negative attitude, and this is the word of butlers. A butler could have heard this statement, and now the whole world can hear it. It means that the emptying of the public space means that it is no longer possible to represent the whole. And why? Because this leaked data, leaked information acts like a caustic agent which disintegrates everything, because there are elements like wiretapping and things that can be used to this effect. And the result is the following. Representation needs distance. And each of us wants to generate a positive self-image and radiate this image to the others. People should have the possibility to hide something they do not want to expose. And when we rob people of this possibility, we rob them of their life behind the scenes, so to say. And in the global village, I am not able to radiate such positive image of myself, because it is immediately undermined by thousands of other messages that will disintegrate such positive image. Like, for example, in the Czech Republic, Andrej Babiš is delegitimized by a number of suspicions, and yet he received 30% of votes. That's one thing. And the other thing is what Mr. Lipovetsky discussed, is the structure of public space. Public space is the arena of fight for the future, and the idea of a better life had always been the major goal of the entire public space. But now there has been a change described by Lipovetsky. There is a hypertrophy of the present. We know the statement that there is no past and future, but there is only the presence of the past, presence of the present, and present of the future. But the present seems to be too imperialistic, because it has a strong prevalence over the past and the future. The future is becoming privatized. Future had always been connected with a public dimension, but today it is connected with the private. So this is the emptying of the public space. It is not possible to legitimize the representation of the whole and to connect it with the future. Mr. Lipovetsky, you've heard this elaboration. Do you think that it is not possible to recover the public space because we are living a period of hyper-individualization of society? The answer: I think it is possible to recover it,
What we can't recover is a public space under the old model. That was something where we see a lack of modernism, of something that is modern, because what is modern today is something against the former regime, against the tradition, etc. And the actors are the state and political parties of such a construction. And the problem is that political parties and the state are not something trusted by the population, by the citizens anymore. What we see is an effort to try new ways in pushing the democratic life forward. We see new forms of democracy emerging, getting established, and that is accompanied by a crisis of democracy. We didn't mention it so far, but you might know that the participation in elections is on decline, so there is a lack, and that is a symptom of it. Let's say in the United States, every second citizen goes to vote, and on the other hand, we have a crisis of failing. Why it is a crisis of representation, why it is a crisis of political elites, and why after the war, when we could do, when we had the chance to do a good politics and not ideological politics, we have come to this situation? The answer: I have written several books on this issue, but I think that we have a certain pressure of consumerism, and what we see is not a politics which is disappearing, but what we see that this absolute belief is disappearing, and that is a consequence of both world wars. Then it is also a consequence of the communist experience with its gulags on this continent. And the Europeans are very reserved to this politics. And on the other hand, we see this pressure of this consumption fever, and people are asking what is the purpose of their existence in their private time. They travel in their private time, they are listening to music, they listen newspapers, use other media, and this was not possible before because people only worked, had to work. And today we are in a different situation, and people are looking for the purpose of their life. They try to look for something intense in their existence. Two questions. First question: so the politics have lost the means to resolve public issues? The answer: yes. That is what I wanted to conclude. This is the third factor. First we had crisis, then we have a consumption way of life, and thirdly, we see an impotence of the state and the politicians vis-à-vis globalization. A modern state was a voluntaristic state. We have said we are going to change life. And today, everybody would laugh. Nobody believes it. Why? Because capitalism determines the running of the world. But if a state wants to avoid increasing, growing unemployment, they are not able to do it. We have crises and crises which are not producing jobs. And state is important, and citizens have understood. They have understood that the state can do something, but not much. And we may say, okay, there is a preference to invest into certain activities, into certain shares, which can be controlled. For instance, I have said environmentalists, they say, yes, we can do something, but the state is never doing anything. And this is the third factor, which was not here in the 18th or 19th century, because then the religion of the politicians was the law is the God, and today it is the people via their representatives. And we know that the state has weakened and has yielded to the growing power of the market. If we continue to see this atrophy of parliamentary democracy, then we will still continue to face the problems of our society. The question is, how can political liberalism continue to be a participant and cope with the growing liberal capitalism?
Síly sa vyčerpali, nemajú schopnosť dnes už ovládať.
What we heard was that the political forces are emptied, exhausted, they cannot control as they used to. And now see the political forces and the impact on society. Sometimes we're even happier that they don't have this power anymore.
Another thing, Central Europe, after the end of the Cold War, has not been able, in spite of its historic experience, in spite of energy on the squares in Praha and Bratislava, and in the face of all this, Central Europe was not able to renew this trust. I don't know how it could have done it, because Central Europe had always been skeptical. Central Europe never believed in the languages, our culture. For example, Kafka, Karl Kraus, or others say that the words are exploding in our mouths. They do not mean anything. Culture of Central Europe had always been pessimistic, or better to say, skeptic. It never believed in the bright future of nations, and it had a distance from all the strong identities. It was a civilization of dawn, not the civilization of dusk, crepuscule. The civilization of dusk was our civilization, not the civilization of dawn. So we are not really heroes of strong opinions. We never believed in strong opinions, and I believe it may be somewhat positive. So our contribution to Europe is good soldier Schweik or Karl Kraus with his analysis of language. And as we all know, there is also a kind of affiliation between postmodern culture and Central European culture. Milan Kundera is a symbol of this symbiosis. Milan Kundera spoke about Central European culture and about postmodernism. But I also want to say something different. That is there any post-representative democracy that does not work with the concept of representation of the whole? How could it function? I would say that society in which we live today is in a deep depression. And when we remember what is the function of depression in the Darwin's evolutionary system, when the herd of apes, when the leader of this company is replaced by younger apes, older apes are in a depression or fall into a depression, which is good for them, because if they responded in one way or another, the other individuals in the group would kill them. And I believe that this can be likened to our situation. We are in depression, but if we tried to defend ourselves, maybe it would be even worse. So this post-representative democracy has reached a stage where people are in a depression. This is also the case of Italy. Italy used to take to the streets. People used to take to the streets every other week, but today it is no longer the case. But there is an exception. There is strong identity-related discourses. Modern public space is against ancien regime, against everything that's old. Tradition must be stronger than what is rational. Only what's rational, what's capable of defending its rationality can withstand, can exist. So there has been a reversal, and from culture, tradition towards identity. Identity-related discourse is everywhere around us. So public space is so to use the words of Lipovetsky, remanaged, rearranged. It is rearranged. And opportunism enters public life. This is also the sign of exhaustion of public space. It is no longer rebelling against anything, and one important feature is that we are in a democracy of permanent accusation. And these accusations are quite confused, and if politicians are accused of anything, very few of them end up before a court. So there are accusations emanating from leaked information. It seems that we have information about almost anybody that we could use against them. So there is this accusation or denunciation, and this is what replaced the initial being against something. So the rebellion against something has been replaced by this accusation. And why is this so? Not only the legislative process, but also the legitimate, what's legitimate is important. And when we stopped defending public space, legality or legitimacy is being suppressed. For example, in the West, in America, it is the trade unions that may take up this role. So legality is overloaded, and in the public space where we should use post-representative democracy is a concept which no longer works with the category of demos or with the category of democracy, and yet it would be a certain way of how to change society. But I believe that it is yet not possible to distinguish the first signs of such movements. Mr. Lipovetsky, you said that it is not quite true that new forms of democratic life are emerging, such forms that will no longer need political parties but will need political representation. Do you agree with what has been said? Because we do not see this new democracy. Is it not only an illusion? Aren't we only hoping that the others will do something for us and will resolve such things for us? I would like to go back to what has been said. I agree with the diagnosis that used a very apt phenomenon or expression of a society in depression. It is true that we go through the moments of a collective depression, and this is what I would like to base my discourse on. In the past, we were looking for the reasons for such depression, and these are, in my opinion, quite easy to distinguish. I would like to ask two questions. What can happen as a result of this deep depression of Western societies? The first scenario is as follows. Society has become so depressed that there will appear a reaction of totalitarian type. Collective cohesion will emerge because depression is related to individualization, and individualization is based on anxiety. People are disoriented. They lost hope. They do not believe anything. They are afraid, anxious, and there will be a moment when demand will emerge for a strong state. Let us have a look at Russia. Something similar is happening there. There is a false democracy, non-liberal system, strong government, strong state that displays its power in this way. I do not believe in such scenario. I believe there could also be another scenario, and that is a strong interconnection with Western democracy, human rights and freedoms, even though this may not take the form of an engagement, personal involvement, but I believe that there will be freedom of press, freedom of expression, and it is even possible that the depression will grow stronger. We witness emergence of psychopathological disorders and the use of psychotropic medication which has a sedative effect. For example, never before have people used so many anxiety-suppressing drugs, and this may be due to this depression in society. But I do not believe that totalitarianism will be chosen. Yet the other thing is ever more evident. in our democracies, there are certain violent events that could not have been foreseen. Like, for example, we have new people who turned into ideology of jihad, and yet they were not born in the Middle East, but they were born in Europe, in France, in the United States, in other countries, and they are acting out of the context, which means for society that there is a multiplication of various sects, like, for example, in the United States, where the sects create their own micro-collectives, where they have their own narrow identity. And also Islamic State replaces the idea. Do you want to imply that Islamic State replaces this ideology of public space? Or those people who are leaving, for example, France or England, going to Iraq, what do they look for? They are looking for this affiliation with something, this faith, belief, passion, which is no longer possible in our consumer democracy. There is a risk that I would call the risk of dangerous minorities rather than dangerous majority. So the risk of democracy consisting in dangerous majority is no longer present. What is present and what is really a risk are various sects and individual psychopathologies. What to do with this? Is this irreversible? When we look at European democracies, we can see that not all of them have fallen into a similar depression. It is interesting, for example, to note that such country as the Netherlands is a country that has many people who declare themselves to be the happiest in the world. It's maybe because they smoke a lot. They smoke pot because they have this free choice to smoke pot. And I agree with it. I am a liberal in this issue because really this is something that makes people calmer. The same as beer. But I also want to say that there are countries that have been able to reconstitute a less conflict-ridden society. Yet there had been also mass killings, but not in the Netherlands. It was in Norway, but also of course, in the Netherlands. There was this killing. I'm not saying it's paradise, but I think that compared to the market force, we have certain goals we need to have, and the goals are maybe not linked with this reconstituting of politics, but we have certain measures we should try to apply. A part of the ideology is rhetorics we don't believe in. We have certain actions we must take. For example, measures that would allow people to have the feeling that may act in their own life. And in order to be able to do so, they must be able to invest into education. Education is not only ideology. Today it is investments into the education system. When you talk about investments, you talk about money? Answer, yes, of course, money is needed. People have to be trained, educated.
how do you imagine a person could do in our globalized world if you have only people with only one type of education? No, we don't need rhetorics and speeches. We need to transform the education system, not because of humanistic reasons of the past, but because an individual should be able to control his or her own life and be able to look for other things than the opium from television and the other things they find which are not ideal in the humane perspective. I think this is a role for the state. The state can't do much against the market. Take the Wall Street. In the education system, the state can do a lot. And I believe in it because when individuals have the possibility to become the creators of their own existence, then there will be a possibility given to get involved into future activities, actions, which are maybe not dreams of changing the world, but it will be dreams of establishing one's own company, to compose music, to write a book. So there are so many possibilities how to act, and therefore you need educated people, and that will not happen from nothing. Why shouldn't the people be trained, educated themselves? Why are they needed? Why do they need to be trained or educated? Why? Because the market is flooded by brands and fashion. I don't want to characterize it as the absolute evil, but the truth is that consumption is everywhere. Everybody wants to have a smartphone and to travel, but this cannot be the purpose. The goal of life is only a vehicle, it's only a means. It's very good to have it, but if it is reduced down to this, then I think it's a very sad civilization. It's sad that after 2,000 years of humanism, we can't offer anything else to our children than a visit to a supermarket or to have every day a different brand. I think it's too sad if this should be the goal. I think that a human being is not only a consumer. Yes, he is also a consumer. It's good to have choice, to have a rich choice and a choice of traveling, of goods, etc. It's very good, but world is more than this. A human being is a being that thinks, that acts, that creates, someone who fights for a better world. There are many aspects in human life. And what is consumption about? Consumption has taken too much space. It has expanded too much, and it floods also the public and private life in a way. We see this invasion because a human being alone can't resist anymore. If you go to a shopping mall or a supermarket, you go there because there is nothing else to do. Why is consumption flooding the world? Not because of marketing, not because of advertisements. It is because of no choice. There is no other choice. If there is nothing else, then you are left with consumption. The question, you say there is nothing else. What else should there be? Because you are only a consumer, so what else could there be? I can give you one sample. If you are a musician, if you compose music, or if you are a writer and you write a drama or you love something, and if you have such a passion, then consumption is not so important anymore. You will not go to a supermarket and you are not dream of buying such and such brand because you have other goals. You want to write your piece of art. You want to compose your music. You want to make a movie. You are involved, engaged in something. And I'm not speaking only a political engagement. I speak about different actions, about passions. If you have this passion which leads you to creation, then against this consumption doesn't count. And market will not like such people. I agree with you. I think that market, and you ask me, no, I'm not here to defend Wall Street or world brands. I think that market can invest also in other things. There are many things which can be done. I don't want to make market the real devil, but we have market, we have consumption, and that is the problem. We are too busy with them. And I think this is the wrong choice to start a front attack. No, we are the ones who are responsible, and the real way, and I think you understood it well, the way how to stop it is not legislation. We've seen that legislation won't stop the market. We must give weapons into the hands of people, not an ideology, but they need something to do. A human being is not only a genetic material that develops. No, a human being needs the will to live, the will to invent, the will to create, because creativity is the power in a human being. Creativity gives the purpose, and then all the other aspects are secondary.
Pán Bielohradský, počúvali ste pozorne?
Mr. Bielohradsky, you listened with great attention, as we all did. Today, there is a prevailing interest in making investment into individualization of people, as Mr. Lipovetsky says, or should we act the other way around? Maybe I will somewhat deviate myself from this passion for engagement. The problem of public space lies mainly in the creation of solidarity, of the feeling of affiliation with a whole, and representation serves for this purpose. I do not want to speak as an extremist, Darwinist, but still I want to, for example, exemplify this on how speech was created. Speech was created as a means of communication among the monkeys in the past, the apes, and when they developed their communication beyond the stage of pushing one another, they started to also develop as a species, and then they developed into human species, and the groups of humans are globalized, and again we are witnessing the lack of communication using words. Maybe people will go back to pushing one another as a means of communication, and people will return to the new governance of proximity. Most crimes today are committed as crimes of proximity, that is, crimes within families or within groups of people who are very close to one another in the physical meaning of the term. So all the wholes have intermingled, and it is necessary to create a global civil society. At this time in Italy, in Rome, there are street fights with a group of immigrants because local population tries to chase them away from their city district. And this phenomenon of hatred or unrest is the result of being too close to one another. And in the past, we used speech in order to master these problems. The ancient peoples were not very close to another, but they gradually merged together, and today it is necessary to find a language. I hope it's not going to be English, but we have to find a language that would be based on this physical closeness of proximity. This is very complicated because we are not like one another. We are getting nearer to one another without being similar to one another. So this is the rapprochement between those who are not similar. But this is not universalism. It is simply a closeness, physical proximity of different entities. And the greatest problem, in my view, today is multiculturalism in a certain meaning of the term, because the concept of multiculturalism is sometimes perceived as a banal concept. Ronald Bard, in Everyday Myths, commented a picture of a black person in French uniform saluting before a French flag, and he said this is a phenomenon of multiculturalism. But we all belong to a certain cultural or interculturalism that is that has a soothing effect on us. But this was not really multicultural picture. Multicultural society differs from a multiracial society by being joined in culture, not only traditions. Culture is something that makes people close to one another. For example, where a woman opposes the dictate of males, this is an expression of culture, not of the tradition. And in order to come back to our initial role, we have to realize what was the initial function of the language. It was the idea of keeping individuals together in a group, in a herd, in a group of animals. And we also have to consider the question, what is the relationship between the national language and the public space? Is it really possible to replace? I, for example, believe that the role of the English language is very negative, especially at the university level, where English is accepted as the language of choice, and the power that lies in individual languages is lost, and the loss of this relationship between the language and certain criticism expressed in the language, it is not possible to translate everything into English. There are things that can cannot be translated into English, and it is difficult to bring this back to the public space. Passion. What is political passion? Let us say that political passion is identification with something general. Alain Badiou has been to Prague. He is a philosopher of verité, a philosopher of truth, return to what is general, and he defended the word communism. He said that it is necessary to bring communism back into public life. This was met with great criticism. People were saying that communism has been discredited, but he said that the word democracy in French fares even worse. And it's really true that the passion can never be passion for something private. It must always be passion for a whole, for universality. We all belong to the West today, but what is West? West is civilization, the type of civilization where I can express or where I can claim that I am right, and I can claim this against all the others. So I am not really condemned for this saying or for this believing, and professing truth. Professing passion is something that is closely related to the West, but political truth is something that prevents me from integrating into society as it is. Political passion always means identification with something, but it does not enable me to identify and with and integrate into society as it is. But there is a memory of a person, attitudes of a person, and this is basically what is West. But West is everywhere. Globalized society is everywhere. And passion is always something that has a relation to the whole and not to an individual. And this should be brought back to the game. Now I think we should start a discussion also with the audience, but before that I want to ask both of you, I say it in French if you allow, Mr. Bielohradsky. So both of you mentioned the necessity to belong to a larger number of people because a collective action is, in your view, more important or better than an individual action. Why? I don't know. I'm a bit lost. I don't know whether a collective action is more important than an individual action, because an individual action is also important. We haven't talked a lot about private life, but I think the essence for everyone is private life. The most important thing is private life. I think we shouldn't go back to the idea that collective is everything. I think what we witnessed in the West last years, this autonomization of private life and the fact that public space has less hope. But I don't think that it is
dying. I don't agree with that. The fact that democracy, public space, is stripped of any passion, so to say, it doesn't mean that it's absolutely negative. It's partially negative, but there is also something positive, and that is that we are not dying. That is the basic point. Europe has experienced 2 world wars due to the passion of politicians. It is not that I suffer from nostalgia, but the fact that society maybe gives too much stress to individualism today is true, but it doesn't mean that I want to go back to the past. I think the past was horrible. It was barbaric. It was a barbaric period which has no precedence in history. And public space and collectivism are more or less floating, I would say. And I think that public space is something which has done away with these mortal wars. I think the mortal wars of the past were really something horrible, and we have not opted for a way when we fight each other. I think it's good that we accept today individual action, this part of individuality, but it's also true that it brings some risks. You've mentioned it, and there are also other risks in public space. For instance, we see a fragmentation in Europe. We have no time to discuss it, but it's a key point. We've seen a problem in Catalonia. We see problems in Belgium. Maybe the Basque will be a next problem area. But you see that there is public space which is based on a collective identity. You've mentioned the Netherlands, and we see also efforts of separation which are the result of economic and cultural facts. And I think that this is not a solution of the problem. For me, it's only a political choice. I don't want to speak about it now, but there are also other things. For instance, the geographic fragmentation of public space. Let's have a look on what's going on in the United States. There you see a privatization of a town, of a city, and the fact that today we witness building of private cities where you have video supervision, you have private code of rules, which is completely separated from public space. There are 30 million of Americans who live in these private towns, in these closed communities, and the consequence is that they have completely lost interest in public space. And then there is a third risk you mentioned, and that is, what are we going to do with multiculturalism? It's a real challenge. It's a real challenge which hasn't come to its end because the migration waves haven't stopped. There are hundreds of thousands or hundreds of millions of people who knock on the door of Europe. And what are we going to do with all that? So that is the first question. And secondly, in the integration, we are not speaking about assimilation today. It's politically incorrect. So what does integration mean? What should we think of public space today? How should it look today? How should it be in compliance with social rules? And how shall it be also able to listen to the differences? But how far shall we go in this? That is the challenge we face. And there are many other problems because it is very difficult to regulate this. And I think we need regulation of all this I speak about. And I think these are also the essential problems of the public space. But we can't elaborate on each of these facts because we are limited in time as a moderator. And I think that because we are having a public discussion on public space, we should give also a chance to the public.
Volám sa
My name
Sivák.
is Sivák,
Ja by som chcel reagovať predovšetkým
and I
na to,
would
čo
like
povedal pán
to respond
Lipovecký.
to what Mr. Lipovecký said.
Urobil diagnostiku západnej
He
spoločnosti.
presented the diagnosis
A ja si
of
myslím, že
Western
táto
society, and I think that this diagnosis is applied far more to our society, a society which 25 years hoped that the public space will grow and be filled because we didn't have it and we don't have it. So maybe the angle of the point of view should change. And Mr. Lipovecký maybe is too negative about the role of the state and ideologies. The important ideologies, the great ideologies are not dead. You also mentioned neoliberalism as ideology, but it still is here with us. You mentioned also the autonomization of the individual, but it's only a pretext to have the people and societies atomized, fragmented. You've also mentioned the need to reform the education system. I wanted to say that this atomized person is only a consequence of several reforms of the education system in France. And my last comment, which is also a question, is that the secret or the secret code you mentioned, and that it is maintained only with technologies, but does it really exist? Is there a secret code? Thank you very much for your question. I will answer the last one. When I mentioned this secret code, I didn't say that it cannot be disturbed or changed. We have seen different cases 2 years ago in America, for instance, but when I mentioned it, I spoke more about the actors. And
in the sense that this love for private life means that this code is not totally dead, that we are not living in society that where everything goes public. And then, yes, you are right, not all ideologies are dead, but those ideologies that I refer to are big collective ideologies. In other words, nationalism, communism, classless society, and these three major ideologies have literally collapsed. But other ideologies are in the making. Yes, you're right. Neoliberalism or ecologism, this is also a major ideology. And all the California-made ideologies that want to combine humans with machines. These are big futuristic ideologies. What I wanted to say is that these ideologies do not have the ability of collective impact, or they do not represent such hope for society as in the 18th century. And the third thing is where I disagree with your analysis. It is the atomization of individuals. I believe that this is a fundamental point. I think that if we only analyze individualization as something as consumerism or something that's in the service of the market, this would not be the right thing to do. I think that the cult of individualism today touches upon the deepest aspects of our existence. It touches upon religion, sexual life, political life, family life, political life. And when this process touches upon the entire existence of an individual, it is not possible to only consider it as superstructure. I can understand that, yes, autonomy of consumers is incorrect autonomy, but we could discuss it. We can, for example, analyze the various relations, like relations to a family, which is something that is not genuine. Like, for example, a woman taking contraception pills is capable of taking any man she wants, but this is not the right reference. I could introduce you to this topic. We have a religious society. It's called Alliance for Family, and this alliance wanted to call a referendum. But in France, nobody has any doubts about it, or in Europe as a whole. In Spain, they tried to introduce an anti-abortion law, but it failed. So we do not speak about a metaphysical phenomenon. The idea is for a collective not to impose the way of life on individuals. Individuals must have a choice. They must be able to decide. And here great progress has been made also as regards women. Women in the last 30 years have reached a different stage in their lives, because in the past their lives were predetermined from the outset, but today women are the makers of their own existence, irrespective of their income. I want to point out that nobody wants to go back, nobody wants to reverse this situation. And this is not only a Western phenomenon, it would be a mistake to consider it as such. Let us take an example that is at the starkest contrast to our model. It is the case of Iran, which forces women to wear these scarves and to wear the veils. It is a tradition in Iran. Yet in Iran, fertility rate is similar to that of France, that is 2 children per woman. What does it mean? It means that Iranian women control their reproduction life. But it is the West that diabolizes the situation in the country, and so political discussions go beyond this framework. Autonomization, individual choice has advanced all over the planet. It means that the idea of connecting civilizations proclaimed by Bill Clinton is not a good idea. I do not believe that the situation is as bad as that. We have another question.
Thank you. It's a question.
Ďakujem.
Hannah Arendt wrote quite interestingly about the relationship between the public sphere and the private sphere, and when the public sphere is diminishing and reducing, that has a direct consequence for the private sphere. And I agree that the individual is very important today. The individual, it seems to me that we live in a world where we're isolated and atomized, and I agree with much of your assessments. I wonder, perhaps the first thing about a public space and about an individual is to reclaim, to recapture the idea of a positive human. Because every conversation we have today about humans, it seems, about individuals, is that they're nasty, or they're toxic, or that they're evil. Whether it's the planet, or whether it's politicians, everyone's corrupt, you can't trust anyone. They're bankers, the politicians. If we're talking about the environment, everybody wants to kill it. We're polluting. If we're talking about anything, everyone's greedy, we're out of control. Relationships, we all want to date rape. We never talk about the beauty, about the human potential to shape the canvas of the world, much of which is still probably, I agree, the legacy of the 20th century, how we have concluded when humans act on the world. You get maybe Dachau and you get the Gulag. But surely there's two things that need to happen. On the one hand, to encourage the public space for more robust dialogue and debate and encourage people to become involved, but also to put humans at the heart of a positive narrative of shaping history, agents for positive change amongst ourselves, but on the world map as well.
Reagovať?
Mr. Bielohradsky, do you want to answer? Yes, I agree, for instance, a positive narrative, but I want to say something about the automation of the individual. There is a metaphor which the West would be this more and more on this side of the automation, and then on the other hand, the mobility, growing mobility, and at the same, and in order to have a growing mobility, we need highways, and so you have a highway then built, and then it is very hard to get rid of it. When it's once built, it's there. Take our highway from Prague. The communism collapsed, and then we have a highway which cuts through Prague, my city. We can't get rid of it. So what is this highway? It's a flight. It is in Italy. It's clear. No, we know that the mafia will get always involved in highway building and control it. But a highway is a political decision, very difficult negotiations, and without a highway, the car wouldn't be so effective and wouldn't lead to the automatization of people. And supermarket is a similar thing. It intensifies consumption, but supermarket is something different. It's there. You can manipulate it so easily. For instance, the German Minister of Agriculture thought that the mad cow disease was due to this pressure by supermarkets who forced low prices. So in our Western public space, we have the steam, which is privileged, a car somewhere alone at a lake, and then a queue on the highway is not what you see on looking on the advertisements. So you see a car alone at a lakeside, but you don't see a picture of asthmatic children, 40,000 asthmatic children in Italy. So this automation in this steam, that is this advertisement and their strong language. And then you have this ice. So I speak about this metaphor, steam and ice. Then ice would be the social rights. We have more and more of them. But where are the rights? The rights are somewhere in a bureaucratic system controlled by bureaucracy. They are written down, but we don't understand. To understand, we need a lawyer. So this bureaucracy, which is a tool, is very incomprehensible. And I would say that we have an imbalance in our system between steam and ice. And this automation we are so optimistic about is growing, so to say, but at the same time, there is also ice growing with it, but forgotten. And so we need this discussion, and we need to remind of this ice. This individualization, this steam, means that each increase in the volume of the steam means an increase of the ice. Steam gets lesser, and nobody speaks about the ice. So there is an imbalance which has to be changed. And the only way available to us in the West to be able to show this ice is literature. I still believe in the grand role of literature, and I believe that only literature can make pain of another person our own, and I think that only literature can break, which is called Espace littéraire by Bourdieu, so this literature field. This is the only space, the only area which helps us to break this imbalance between close and distant. And we don't speak about the person who is distant and that it could be a close person to us. So more and more autonomy and more individual freedom, which is accompanied by the growth of ice in our public space, but nobody speaks about it. And we need this positive narration, this positive story, which has to be linked with this. We have to perceive that this denunciation of ice, which is a price for the autonomization, is a positive narration, which is in fact the new question, what to do with the ice.
Pour répondre à votre question,
to respond to your question, I would like to mention two issues. You mentioned new investments into public space, and I think that due to the evolution of the world which we live now, it is necessary to find a plural public space, because a unitarian public space seems to me to be a characteristic of the world of modernity, but the world we have now, with many catastrophes we have developed, we have think of different aspects of diversity, of different manners of action, and I believe in the possibility of a collective action which will not be a centralized event. Maybe it will be fragmented and will give the possibility to an individual to act and to transform things, and will give purpose to their lives, and will change public space, which is central. So that is the first remark. And the second remark is an issue concerning civic life. And when we speak about the individualization of our society, we associate immediately with isolation. You have said that person becomes isolated and the individual is evil because it is very egoistic. But on the other hand, individualism is egoism, egocentrism equal narcissism, and I would like to underline this because I think it is only one aspect of the issue, and I have also an example to illustrate what I want to say. It's said that an individual today, that a person lives in isolation today, that people have their smartphones and are not communicated with other human beings, but it is a wrong understanding. It is not true. An individual had never a feeling of meeting so many other people in these villages or towns, because people used to hate each other in villages and towns. You had quarrels with your neighbors. Fathers would hate their children, and the idea today is that that was solidarity. No, it is only ideology. Let's listen, go to a large city today, Madrid, and Rome, Paris, everywhere where you go, everything is full. So how do you want to explain it? So on the one hand, we hear that people get into their own cocoon, their own space, but on the other hand, wherever you go, there is hardly a space to meet or to move. People are always linked together via digital devices, but they continue to communicate. But what we do today is that we choose our relations. It's not the traditional relations of the past, family relations. The idea that technology isolates you or separates you is on the one hand true, but on the other hand not true, because it gives you new opportunities for new meetings, new opportunities for new socialization, and
second, we are told individualization, it is retraction of egoism, and yes, it may be true, but what is the other face of this question? It is the association life. Never before have there been so many associations as in this hyper-individualistic society. And this is a true paradox and a true problem. It means that under normal circumstances, when people's individualism would be only an autocentric movement, everybody would stay at home, watch TV, take care of one's family. But this is not so. We also see in France, where we have more than 1 million associations per 60 million inhabitants. And this amounts to 40 million of adult individuals in France. So this is an increase in association of a moralistic society. Moralistic association life only was typical of a certain type of women, like Catholic women, for example, but people would not join in associations as often as today, or take voluntarism. For instance, never before have there been so many volunteers. This ideological vision that we are speaking about should be abandoned, because we in the West, we are not all bad simply because we are focused on our individuality. But our individuality is also a good thing. It is not evil. And it is the vision of the Pope who is entitled to think this, but this is not true. Sociological truth is that individuals are able to mobilize themselves. They are capable of performing altruistic deeds. Why do we see doctors going to Africa, exposing themselves to difficult circumstances? This is against this assertion. We are not worse than in the past. We only function in a different way. We should cease thinking that individualization of our world is equivalent of generalized egoism and that nobody is interested in the others. This is not true. There are not so many political events organized in the old fashion. This is true, but there are new forms of socialization, new forms of engagement, which may not lead to good results, but they are not catastrophic either.
Možno to bude posledná otázka, lebo už sme tu vlastne 2 hodiny.
Maybe this should be the last question, because we are here now discussing for 2 hours. I don't know whether somebody is willing to ask the last question. Maybe you are afraid of the answers. The floor is yours.
Question in English. And my question has to do with the statement of one of the panelists who said that English is negative because the power that lies in, it takes away the power that lies in individual languages. And I would say that in my own case, I think the opposite is true. I come from the Philippines originally. There are 87 dialects or languages in the Philippines, and I don't think that we would have been able to really communicate with each other without the power of English. So I hope that you're able to elaborate on your statement, or perhaps to qualify it, because it seems I misunderstood it. I think, for instance, that a lot of people who are here are able to participate because of the power of English, or because of the opportunity that English provides us. So I think it's a bit dangerous to come to a, let's say, to a forum where we're discussing us and them, and then to divide us because of English. So I hope I misunderstood you. But the other question that I have is, where you talk about Arendt saying, you know, when you give something, when you take something away from the public space, you take away, you in fact add to the other space. And I think what's happening now, for instance, with the use of internet and automation, is that there is no such simple arithmetic that's happening. So I like the idea that, in fact, perhaps public space and private spaces needs to be redefined. Because I know, for instance, in my own case, when I participate with a lot of people on the internet who are taking positions against certain politicians. I know that the public space is expanding, but that is from a private space that has expanded with the tool of the digital technology. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me, sir. Do you want some answers? Just a few comments, or are you going to risk it? Okay. Nech sa páči.
So first of all, what does it mean to understand each other? Let's distinguish between a dispute or a difference and a simple dispute. When you have a dispute, you can have a better solution if you have a unbiased approach, neutrality. But on the other hand, you have other differences which cannot be resolved by a higher level of neutrality. You can resolve them only by a different method of communication. So, by inventing a language, and we learn not only mathematics at school, but we also learn poems and we recite them. And then suddenly, though we were bored before, suddenly we see that a poem is a way of communication. You realize that you may use it as to communicate something. I often quote that Oppenheimer, when he saw the bomb blast in the desert, he started to recite the poem Brighter Than Thousand Suns from Bhagavad Gita, because he knew Sanskrit. And maybe the new era which starts was expressed better by the poem than by mathematical equations. And what happens with English today is this. English has become a supermarket where you have ready-made sentences, and when you learn these sentences, these blocks you learn so that you can use it in your tests, and that weakens this struggle to find your own language in order to be able to express yourself, to be able to understand the other person suffering problems. So English has become this universal something, and what we need now is to discover a way in the global public space of communicating something where neutrality is not enough. Take the art. The West has always been characterized by the fact that the art was having a role, that it has always discovered the language. The old hegemony, exhausted hegemony, is first determined hegemony, exhausted in a piece of art. Take the 60s and the change we have witnessed in the Czech and Slovak literature. So what I want to say, that I believe, like Latin has been fragmented into other languages, Italian, Romanian, French. So the English, universal English, which doesn't belong to anyone, which unites Japan with Scandinavia, will again split into national languages that will replace the existing languages as it was in the times of the breakdown of Roman Empire. But what I see, first of all, and which is devastating humanities, is the use of English as a neutral means, so we can translate everything into English or take words from English, and when you publish in English. So what we see is that we are losing this struggle to find the proper language to express what you want to say in the proper way. And this is a part of the public space, the depth of public space. Public space needs to have its depth, and the depth is made by different processes. Vulgarization, so you can translate everything into this, you can disseminate and you can translate. And when you translate, when you say tradurre, it means also to bring somebody somewhere, and this tradurre only into English means that we lost this struggle. Look how the status of French has declined, or why Spanish doesn't play a similar role. So we see this simplification brought into communication by English, and I perceive it as a threat, as danger. And then if you have a native speaker, and then this formal universal English, it is also a very unhappy relationship, because they feel this universal English as a foreign language. And I think English is the least appropriate language to be used in international communication, because it's an idiomatic language, and we have to take over the idiomatic images, because otherwise we won't be able to communicate. So grammar is not valid here, but the idioms overrule. And what I wanted to say is this cheap surface of globalization, and that is this neutral English, which is so difficult to be used when you want to translate what you think, in order to make it clear what makes you different, and at the same time to show that what makes us different is uniting us and not dividing us. And this is the English which you have been translated to. Mr. Lipovetsky, do you want to respond or not? You don't have to. I believe that the issue of dominance of English is a fact. It is only a reflection of a certain economic dimension. And I believe that for a number of civilizations, and I'm convinced about it, the gentleman who asked the question is from the Philippines. In their country, they do not perceive English as a dangerous language. For example, in Ukraine, Russian is seen as more dangerous than English, but this perception is one thing, but I am interested in this issue because it has a certain social and planetary dimension. We are a civilization of planetary networks. You have internet all over. A while ago you spoke about global village, where the differences are getting shorter thanks to electronic communication. But at the same time, there are trademarks that are present all over the globe. At the same time, there are 2 or 3 areas that continue to resist globalization. First, it is food industry. We continue eating culinary specialties typical of our culture. For example, when you make a few kilometers and when you go a few kilometers to a different place, you see that supermarkets carry different brands, reflecting the culinary traditions of the region. On the other hand, we had never had such a variety of food, especially in big cities. You have Thai, Vietnamese, Chinese restaurants, but at the same time you have your culinary traditions that survive. And
the other thing. It is true that English is a universal international language. Still, people feel great attachment to their own language. I do understand your worries, but I do not perceive them as a big threat to cultural identity. Because of this planetary dimension of our lives, there are still people adhering to their identity. Let us take Quebec, for example. You have English civilization, but there are 5 or 6 million people using French as their language. So I believe that in this phenomenon of globalization, there is still a will to recreate one's personality and do not sink into something anonymous. I do not think that languages are endangered by English. They could be endangered, for example, in, let's say, pop music, but not in other areas. I do not see an area where English could constitute a threat. A while ago, I spoke about Catalonia. In that region, people use their own language, have a great attachment to their language. So do the Valens in Belgium, and also small countries with only a few inhabitants stick to their language. I believe that this is a reaffirmation of our existence. Maybe there are some technical problems. The problem of identity is not what I had in mind. English is like a prefabricated house. It is made up of prefabricated construction elements. And just try to read the communications of the European Commission. All these are prefabricated texts. One remark. What is the origin of the word hypocrisy? The word hypocrisy is the fourth part of preparation of rhetoric. First, it is disposition, decoration, and then you must learn how to read it in front of a mirror. And in Europe, hypocrisy means something negative, but initially it was hypocrisy referred to the stages of preparing a speech, but in the current understanding of the meaning, hypocrisy is different. I believe that just as our culture is afraid of this dictatorship of prefabricated elements, English is the example of such pre-prepared discourses. This is the prefabricated construction. Americans use their own language, but they have a same relationship to this prefabricated house as we. What I have in mind is our struggle for the meaning, the struggle for something that has not been pre-prepared, something that we did not expect to learn, and we learned it. And this is what English endangers, not as a language, but a language used to this effect. Thank you very much, Mr. Lipovietsky and Bielohradsky. In a while, our guests are going to sign their books in the stand of Art Forum, and you will also find the program of Central European Forum that will continue also in the next few days. I wish you a very pleasant evening.